Welcome everyone to episode 138 of Raw Sport. My name is Ahmed Al Hooli. We are back with another very special guest. We've been away for a couple of weeks, unfortunately due to travel, but today we're back with another big one. The man himself, Mr. Jake Ellis. Jake, welcome to Raw Sport, buddy. How's things?
Very well, thanks, mate. How's things your way?
Good, mate. Just getting through. It's always something to do. Always busy. Jake, enough about me. You're our guest today. Many know you as the man behind the Team Ellis brand, the entity. Team Ellis. Tell us a bit about Team Ellis, where you guys started. We'll start with there, and then we'll go into the future and how you guys see yourselves positioning yourselves as one of the dominant players in our sport.
Yeah, well, obviously come from a boxing family. My dad, his name's Lester Ellis. He won a world title back in 1985, super featherweight IBF. And my uncle Keith, he won Trainer of the Century from the AMBF. So I was pretty much born into it. I often hear a lot of people saying, my first day I walked in the gym and whatever. With me, I don't even remember the first day I walked in the gym. The house I was pretty much from when I was just born all the way up until sort of about 10 years old, had a boxing gym in it that was open to the public. So, we just, born and bred in the sport and, had my first amateur fight at the legal age down here in Victoria at 12 years old. But even before that, I'd probably had about a dozen exhibition fights, from about that 6, 7 years old. And yeah, had a couple dozen amateurs, turned pro, had a couple of pro fights, but where it all really started changing for me was around 16, 17. I really started taking a liking to the promotional and management side of things, and decided by, as soon as I left high school, I was just going to jump straight into it, and done my first ever professional boxing event in 2011, 3 months out of high school, and it was an experience. That first 12 months, we managed to produce 3 shows. And at the end of the year, I was probably in more debt than money I'd ever seen, never mind had. So, it was a tough slog that first, it was the first couple of years. And then, slowly but surely, we started getting into better and better venues. My network started expanding. More and more fighters started coming to me. And fast forward up until about 2017 is when we decided to open up our first boxing gym. And since then we've opened up a few more. My brothers all were involved in boxing. My cousins, every male Ellis has had a boxing fight. So we've all been involved to some extent. But the main drivers behind the Ellis family now is myself and my brother Darcy.
Wow, quite the story. In such a convoluted industry, boxing is a very tricky industry in Australia. You have a small market in a very complicated industry. How have you managed to navigate these difficult and turbulent years, especially the earlier ones? You said you were in debt off the bat.
Yeah, just through the love of the sport, mate. A bit of a, similar to what you hear a lot of fighters say. You just have a bit of that do or die mentality. I remember early days after a couple of years of trying to be a promoter. My mum and my dad sat me down and said, boxing's an industry where it takes millionaires and turns them broke. You can't be a broke kid wandering in thinking you're going to be successful. It's just not a thing. And, obviously they had experience. They've always owned gyms and done, little amateur shows and stuff like that. And, but mate, just through sheer determination, persistence, and you've got to get through a lot of things in this sport that you wouldn't have to do in any other industry. There's obviously, I believe the only 2 sports in Australia governed by the Australian government are obviously racing and boxing. So, we are constantly under that pressure. Then you've obviously got the nature of the sport itself, very, violent, and no matter how you sort of try and twist and turn it, you're exchanging brain cells for money, and you've got to try and tell a story and try and attract media attention, because for the most part, especially back then when I first started back in sort of 2011, mate, you couldn't even get a local write-up. A bloke could win an Australian title, you couldn't even get a mention on the radio. And that's when the radio was dying. So, you know, and I had a chat with my uncle, and he was sort of telling me, he goes, you know, back in the late 80s, the Australian government basically ruled boxing as a blood sport. And, you know, back then they were doing ringside TV on Channel 7. My dad was, you know, boxing all the time on TV. And, you know, back then you didn't have to sell tickets or anything like that. You just, you know, announce that you're fighting and the venues would fill up. Now it's, you know, you really got to sort of grind to get those ticket sales. Even the fighters themselves often, you know, turn into salesmen. They're literally 50% fighters, 50% ticket sellers, because it's just so hard to produce an event without that support from, you know, ticket sales or, you know, pay-per-view if you're lucky enough to have network television or whatever it might be. So, mate, it was didn't you know, definitely didn't have it, you know, definitely did have its challenges, but like I said, mate, just through the sheer love of the game, managed to get through it.
Jake, you're one of the few that's been able to get that traditional media, get the PR for the fighters. Your fighters go on 3AW, SEN, all these other networks, and you're one of the early ones who brought in this social media model into the sport, where you had these influencers fighting. I hear the unofficial numbers. You had over 100,000 people on streams, pay-per-view streams, and whatnot. What led you down that path?
Well, mate, to be honest with you, it's just probably out of sheer desperation, just trying my best to try and rally up some support for my fighters, because by about 2017-18, I had pretty much the game on lock down here in Victoria. I had majority of the fighters were signed to either myself or Brian Armatuda, who were working, you know, very closely together. And what had happened was, around that same time, I seen a bit of a turn in boxing where Jeff Horn came out, and he just, you know, rejuvenated the whole sport. And then it sort of molded over to you know, other guys, eventually the Cambosises and now Apatayas, Zeus and all that. But back then, Jake Paul had just come out, and he was saying that, you know, he's going to do boxer. I think it was Logan Paul originally with KSI, and then it's molded into Jake Paul. And, you know, we all know what he's done, and obviously what he's planning on doing. I know maybe he needs a bit of his, you know, yeah, it's a bit of a question one, this one, but, you know, throughout it all, I sort of looked at it and I thought, you know, this could be a real good opportunity to get some much needed marketing and exposure for my fighters. So what I sort of found was, when I was to bring in, so originally it was something like Married at First Sight. I noticed that these two blokes were bluing over, I think it was a girl or an issue they had in the house. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to pull them out, do a show called Fight at First Sight, and just see how it goes. And we basically did that. And the numbers we seen were like just uncomparable to any pro fighter, or no matter how good they were over the years, nothing compared to the attention we got from these guys. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to try and see if I can do a little bit of a thing where I get these influencers and I can sort of do a bit of a joint promotion where I've got real fighters mixing with influencers, and that way the influencers can get the authentication from the fighters, and the fighters can sort of snatch up a little bit of their following and see how it all works. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, through that exposure, mate, it really worked. You know, we had boys that would struggle to sell 10, 20 tickets, and after a few of these events, we're doing 200-300 tickets, you know, and that obviously that pool that, you know, that is now a lot, it's a lot more fruitful. There's a lot more money around. You're able to sort of go about their careers in a much more efficient and just an overall better way for those fighters, because now there's just a lot more options. Whereas before I had to fight someone locally that could sell some tickets or anything like that. But now I could go overseas. I could sanction big titles, and just through them feeding, you know, my stable of, let's call them real fighters, I was just all in. And, you know, recently it's died off a little bit. It's a little bit more now about the crossover athletes. So whether it's like the AFL guys or rugby guys, you know, our gym's full of them. Taylor Harris, Clay Smith, Nelson, Solomona. We've got them all at our gym, but we've also got, you know, Australian champion Tommy Fitzgerald. We've got the world youth and former Aussie middleweight champion in Mitch Leake, and another half a dozen pros as well. So, you know, we've really sort of mixed the two worlds together and found our sweet spot.
Before I go into the brands and how their response is to the sport, to the promotional companies. I want to ask you, how did you get access to these people that are working with all these networks? Because not anybody can just pick up the phone and call these people. There's obviously it's a bit more convoluted than that.
Yeah. Well, I had my brother Lester Ellis Jr. He was quite a successful actor. He was him and Margot Robbie were the only two Aussies signed by William Morris Endeavour, the guys that just bought the UFC.
Ari Emanuel, yeah.
Yes. So he he'd been to Hollywood more times than I could count. He's been on really successful Australian shows, and then my best mate growing up was Anthony Topic, and he basically went behind him and tried to get involved in the acting world. He ended up falling into some modelling, and through that built a lot of connections with these reality TV stars, actors, models, and all that. So basically through his network, we managed to sort of, let's call it force our way through and make a few guys, a few offers that they couldn't refuse. And once they seen, that it wasn't, a death match, we weren't putting him in to get killed. They were, big gloves, small duration of fights. I think they were doing 3-2s or 3 1.5s or something like that. No one got hurt. They all got paid quite well. And then that just sort of garnered momentum and, just sort of took off from there.
Awesome. Brands, corporations, we see there's that hesitancy to enter the sport, even with one of the biggest boxing organizations, No Limit now. You don't really see that. You don't see the names that you would see in other codes. Is there a reason why, or something you've heard or your dad's told you, your uncle's told you, you've experienced?
Well, I think it comes down to two things. Like the nature of the sport is obviously quite violent, so that can't be, looked over. But we also have a bit of an image where, like the industry is gangster-ridden and there's an underworld sort of tone to it. So when brands see that, they think, like it's very violent as it is. They watch the news. Obviously, they don't give us a good rap. Every time something, like the only time we get media is when there's a drama or when it's bad news. So, they look at that and they just think, it's probably not best for their brand. And I think that's, being honest, they're the two main reasons, mate.
And how have you guys navigated that?
Well, we've just made sure that, that we go about things in a way where we really want to make our events family friendly. And you're a member at our gym. So you've walked into them and, the people that we sort of attract are that younger, we're looking for guys that are just generally come from, again, you can't really make a rule where, make sure they come from a good family and It's not like that, but you just make sure that they're not involved with their focus and priorities aren't on anything else but being an athlete. And usually you can get a bit of an inkling when people are coming in and they're just doing it for the wrong reasons or, whatever. I don't want to get too much into it, but for the most part, you just want to scan your fighters and not just their ability to fight, but also their ability to entertain, what story you can tell with them, and that, you're not going to do all this for nothing because then he's just going to get caught up in some street garbage and flush it all down the drain. So it's just about really making sure that we select the people that we work with correctly.
As an industry, we're in a very interesting time. We see for the first time in a long time, Foxtel has come into the play and actually spent money, paid a decent amount of money, great amount of money, and invested in the sport. Invested in a couple of names, Yazoo's, Jake Ellis, so on. The other outlets are not really doing much, right? Other than Stan recently announced their relationship with Mick Francis and Jai Pattaya and whatnot. Outside that, everything you hear about Stan is this promoter's doing a partnership with Stan and this promoter's doing a partnership with Stan, and nobody's doing anything really with Stan. It's been all talk. From an industry perspective, right? Are we in a place right now where we could potentially see that opposition come in and actually make it interesting for once in a very, very long time?
I don't know, mate. I think Foxtel are just leading the way with it all.
They are.
You know, it's just really hard to be honest with you. Since I've been promoting now, going on 15 years, I've never seen anyone do what Foxtel's done. So I know back in the day they were doing a little bit, and they were handing out decent little fees to the promoters. Back then it was Ange DiCarlo, Brian Armatuda. So when I first started in the sport, they had the Fox, and then it obviously went to like Dean Lonergan, Dave Higgin, and then it's gone to No Limit or whatever. And in all my time, I've never seen what Foxtel, for the amount of support that they're putting behind the sport, whether it's financial, media, whatever it might be, I've never seen it. So I think I'd be sort of naively sort of optimistic to think that we're going to get two. But, I mean, I've been hearing Stan are looking to make some moves. The Zone, I know they've sort of bought Fox. I don't really know how that's all going to work. And, there's we're hearing every day there's these different streaming services popping up. So, I mean, all we can do is hope. But for now, it seems to be how it's always been. Whereas, if it ain't Fox, then it's pretty much nothing.
Is that an indicator that the sport can be lucrative?
It can be. Yep. I mean, if you look at our athletes, if you look at the top 10 athletes in the world, there's always a couple of boxes in there, so it definitely can be. And, as far as the sport itself, like the way I sort of break it down to everyone is everyone inherently thinks they're a fighter. No one, like me personally, I've never had the thought that I could ever do rugby or wanted to do it or soccer or anything like that. And the way I break it down best is I sort of say to people like, if you're in the schoolyard and you're watching the best game of footy, the best game of rugby, the best game of basketball, or two spuds were at the back having a punch on, where are you running? Where are you going to go? What are you going to go watch? You can go
punch on.
Exactly. You're watching the worst fight you've ever seen over the best game of footy you've ever seen. And when you look into it, I mean, have you ever heard of anyone paying $50 for one game of footy, one game of soccer, one game of rugby? But they do it all the time with boxing. Yeah, they complain, but they pay it. So it tells you what this sport can be. The problem is it's very hard to get like a UFC model or an AFL model in boxing. Everyone since the beginning of time has tried to get a monopoly or tried to just take over the sport. But the nature of it is that you just can never do it because you're always going to have someone coming out of the Philippines or Russia or Mexico or whatever it might be that isn't necessarily going to be signed with you because you didn't know them as an amateur or in the infancy stages of being a professional. So I think there's huge potential. There's always been potential. And now with guys like Turkey and, a couple of these big promoters like Eddie Hearn, who you've recently had on, I think we're in the best spot, at least in my experience, in my 15 years that I've ever seen. So, mate, I'm definitely more hopeful than ever.
Wow. What about inside Australia? Where do you see the sport at?
Well, I think No Limit are doing a really good job. I think you always got to take your hat off to the OGs, which is, Brian Armatuda, Ange DiCarlo, Jamie Mai, even Paul Nazari. Like, mate, he's done some great work over the years. He gets a stack of fighters on his cards. He's consistent. He gives guys opportunities to build their records and build up the ranks. And, but right now, mate, it's you can't go past No Limit. They're doing the best shows. They've got the best fighters and they're getting the best numbers. So definitely them.
And they're bringing to the sport what we haven't seen in a long time, the diversification of their marketing. We've seen in the last event that they did Inside the River. They brought all these influencers over. You had Liam Parrott there. So they're mixing it up a bit. It's not just traditional media, Daily Telegraph and so on. They're moving into this new world where they're actually bringing it all together. So doing a good job.
And you've seen like a lot of people going away from that traditional stuff, whether it's just the core structure of the sport or the way we sort of market and advertise. Like, mate, it used to be all about like, TV commercials and signs and stuff like that. Now it's all social media, so if you're able to do something like have a floating ring in the middle of what river was it? Like the Brisbane River.
It's in Brisbane somewhere.
Yeah. Like having something float like that's going to bring clicks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about at the end of the day. When you get the numbers, then you're able to leverage those numbers with people like, other brands that can bring sponsorships and stuff like that. So, mate, it's all about telling the right story and trying to like break the mold, because I feel like boxing, it's always at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to sort of evolution. You know, it feels like it's always a little bit stuck. So, mate, seeing these guys do stuff like that inspires me. I like to think I've done a few little things myself that is not, you know, not by the status quo, whether it's, you know, bringing in influencers or, you know, actually having, you know, or just all types of things that the way we go about marketing. And I was one of the early adopters of sort of like social media, because back in 2010, 2011, people still it was pretty dead, you know, and that was like my main little nook and cranny that I was able to sort of swivel through to really, you know, stamp out a little bit of market share where I was able to do my shows and have a bit of a say in boxing.
Absolutely. And we've seen that evolution through your shows and your gyms. Your gyms are quite interesting, actually. I'd say, I mean, going there, seeing the experience you've built inside the gym, you feel like you're at a fight night. And I think the successes come because every person that walks through that door believes they can fight on fight night. That's just my sort of analysis. Take us through the thinking, how you came to where you are. You run now probably one of the most successful boxing gyms out there through your Kilo one and your Lavender one, and I'm sure you'll be opening up many more to come in the years to come. What's the mindset there?
Well, mate, we just, you know, I grew up in a gym, mate, that had 3 heavy bags, a ring held together by duct tape, blood all up the walls that had never been washed for, you know, years and decades. And, you know, it was very unattractive. I remember one time I was there with my uncle, and we were part of like a footy club. A couple of footy boys walk in, mate, they stood at the front door, had one look around and just turned around and walked straight back out. And these are tough boys. Like, these are footy guys from Sunshine. You know, for the guys that don't know, Sunshine's one of the, you know, tougher
Sunshine
areas.
was rougher than what it is ever. Yeah.
Yeah, mate. Yeah. So, you know, and whereas when I looked at it, I thought that's the problem. Like, we segregate people. Like, I want to try and make boxing for everyone. And when I say everyone, I don't mean everyone can be a world champion. I'm saying everyone can train as a boxer and use it as fitness or weight loss or mental health or self-defense, which we need down here in Melbourne more than ever these days. And, you know, and just sort of try and create something where your everyday person can come into the sport, whether it's just in the gym or have like a little 8-week camp where they have like a 3x1 minute fight and have a boxing experience or whatever it is, and try and get everyone a little bit more involved and not be so segregated. Like, you know, over here, if you're not like, you know, the toughest, you know, made up of the toughest genetics out of all the lands, you're not welcome. You know what I mean? And all it did was cap ourselves. Because I remember, like, when I say remember, I remember being told that back in the 70s, your average 4-round boxer would get paid better than your average AFL player. So it tells you that what the potential, but it also tells you how far we've dropped off. And I believe it's from that segregation, you know?
So the AFL's gone up and we've gone down.
Exactly.
Wow. Jake, you've been very generous with your time. I don't want to hold you too much longer. Do you have any parting words for us?
Yeah, mate. Well, we've got a show coming up December 6th. So, mate, got to give that a little plug. I got Mitch Leake fighting Ben Horn. He just lost his opponent last week. So it's been a bit of a frustrating one. We lost our main event, semi-main event. Then we lost Clay Smith. Like, we end up losing like 3 or 4 fights out of the 7-fight card. But we're putting it, you know, we're piecing it all back together, and we got real lucky with Ben Horn. He just, you know, he was fit, just coming off his bare knuckle fight. So we managed to pull that off. So I'm really happy with that. I'm very grateful to Ben and his team and the whole Horn team. Then next year we're looking at doing five shows. We're looking to do quite a big network deal as well. We've got a massive announcement coming next week that you'll hear all over the media. And one of our fighters we're working in with some big promotional companies. You could even say the biggest. And all in all, mate, we're just we're just out here, couple of blokes, mate, me, my family, my cousins, my best mates, just trying to make boxing as big and as potent as it once was.
There you go. Jake, where can people watch it? Where can people buy tickets?
You can buy tickets at the venue at the Melbourne Pavilion, and you also can buy tickets from teamellis.com.au.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen, the man himself, Mr. Jake Ellis. Thank you very much for joining me on Raw Sport.